So in this tutorial I want to help you sort of improve your online Canvas-based teaching by looking at the brush palette. So I've got my toolbar open here. Just be reminded, if it wasn't open I'd go to Window, Toolbar, and then I get my default settings here. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to click here on the brushes and pencils icon, and I get this standard range of options here. Just be aware that if you wanted to, you could also open the brush library in here, and you get a vastly greater number of options, the vast majority of which I've never used in my life, but you might find a use for them if you're, if you're of a good artistic level and you know these tools well. So a couple of things I think that are really essential for you. Personally, I use the ballpoint pen for almost everything, whether it's simple drawings, whether it's writing on the screen, annotating things, whether it's labeling diagrams, I will use the ballpoint pen. By far the most important control for me is if I double click that ballpoint pen, I can change the brush strength. Okay, so here I've got it set to 1.2, we'll use a nice banana yellow. If I draw onto here, it's going to give me that kind of effect. Okay, it's going to give me that kind of effect. If I make it a little bit thicker, it's going to give me a thicker effect, and if I make it up there, it's going to give me a thick effect. Now opacity, or opacity I think it's pronounced, is just the opposite of transparency. So this would mean my yellow line is 0% transparent, 100% opaque. That was a bit embarrassing. My colleagues nodding to me say opaque. James, come on. I think it's spelled with a Q-U-E.
At the end?
Yeah, absolutely. How embarrassing. Anyway, if I make that a little bit less, of course, you're going to see this become more transparent as a result. So you can use that if you want to. Personally, I don't. I keep it to 100%. And when I'm using my brushstroke, I use around about 1.3, depending on the size of the canvas and the size of the screen. So you've got that. Now, I guess the other thing to get excited about is you also have these different options here in terms of tools. There are some nice uses for these. I mean, I do use the airbrush occasionally. For example, let me just put a shape in. Let me just do something like a circle, for example. I might use my airbrush, for example, and what I might do is, oops, I didn't mean to do that. I might use my airbrush to kind of fill this in terms of like a textured, coloured fill. Okay, so there's things you might want to do with things like that. There's some nice little options. Some people I know they prefer to teach with a pencil line rather than a pen line. Feel free. You've got a couple of others, like, if you've got a really nice calligraphic handwriting, you can do things in that style if you want. I don't personally, but and then you've got a fountain pen. Again, my fountain pen's much too thick, or my inking pen, so I'll make it much less thick, but you can do things with that if you wish to. Okay, so if there's things that you want to do that stylistically for you work well, then of course feel absolutely free. Now, one thing on the eraser that I would sort of suggest to you is kind of useful, you may use this hard eraser quite often. You might even make it a default setting on one of the buttons on your pen, for example. But I would say one of the real key things here is if you rub out, so if I start rubbing out here, again I can make the eraser thicker to make it easier to rub out bigger items. If I start rubbing out here my circle and my fill, it's important that I have my background set to white, set to black. Because if I don't and I set this to white, then you're going to see that any rubbing out you do is going to rub down to that white background. And what I want to do is I want my background to be the same as my canvas color, so that if I do rub something out, that works nicely for me, so my background stays as it is. Okay, so a couple of nice tools for you there. You can get to your brush library from this click here, and again, another way, if you've got your ballpoint pen, for example, open here, you can just click that button and it'll open there. Otherwise it's click and it'll open for you from there. So those are some nice little techniques for you to get used to.